What up, Wizards? It's Dev. And Igby. Igby's down here, too. Forget to be too cute to forget. From Mtg, we like it in Magic. I'm sure you know the whole shtick by now. But anyway, what we're going to do today is we're going to do a quick, fun, informative video. I'd like to hit all the neds. That's how you make a good YouTube video, probably. But anyway, cut to the chase. Lately, all I've been doing with my entire life is playing 2022 Standard. I haven't touched normal Standard in like 2 weeks at this point. Get that garbage away from me. I don't ever want to see it again. It's going to haunt my nightmares. I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night sweating. Like, throw the bell train! It's a nightmare. Anyway, I've just been having too much fun in 2022, brewing up decks again for what feels like the first time in forever, like for real brewing up decks, and not just being like, well, this is some jank that's going to lose. This time I'm like, oh, this is some jank that could win. Let's hope. We actually have hope again. And that feels good, right? So literally all I've been doing with all of my time is playing 2022 Standard. Help, it's affecting my personal relationships, but I don't care because Magic is fun again. But, pause for a breath. However, because there's always a thing, I'm sorry to bring down the mood, brewers, but there are always going to be cards that are good, right? That's Magic, baby. You know, cream rises to the top. Magic the Gathering's no different, and we're already seeing some cards at this early stage of 2022 Standard that are setting themselves apart, establishing themselves as all-stars in not only this format moving forward, but real Standard. You know, after rotation, Throne of Eldraine, Ikoria, all those sets are gone, and we get the new Innistrad set in September. Maybe some cards in that new set will invalidate some of the cards we talk about today, but I find that somewhat unlikely. It could always happen, but these cards have already established themselves as very important cards that either go in a lot of different decks or build arounds in and of themselves that we'll probably see a lot of for the next year plus. So we need to talk about what the next big bads are. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 cards in 2022 Standard. Because I'm a monster. Did I stutter? Well, yeah, I did a little bit there, actually. Sorry about that. And we're back. Sometimes you need an intro to break things up a little bit, you know, keep things interesting, just like sometimes you need some self-promotion as well. I'm sorry to drop it on you like that, but I won't take too long. Just like and subscribe. Do all of these things. Watch me play Magic on Twitch. Support the channel on Patreon for $1 a month. Vote on what we do around here. And follow me on Twitter. If you want to do, I don't care. If you want to do that, that's fine. If you don't, that's cool. I'm just glad that you're here. But anyway, we got to talk about the list. I hate self-promotion so much. But they tell you to do it. Anyway, let's talk about cards. You clicked on the video for Magic cards. We're like 3 minutes in and we haven't done that yet. So let's talk about some quick honorable mentions before we get to the actual list here, because I've kind of got a few of those. And I want to go ahead and speed through them relatively quickly, even though I think that all of these are very impactful cards. This is more or less like a top 15 kind of. But anyway, we'll start with Orcas in the honorable mention slot here. This has just been a really good card in the Rakdos treasure decks. Occasionally you'll see it in Grixis or Jund decks as well. The Jund decks often have a treasure theme. Grixis decks will often have a treasure theme. But for the most part, you'll see this just in straight-up Rakdos mid-range alongside Kalane, Goldspan Dragon, a couple of other treasure things, right? But all that treasure means that you can pump a lot of mana into Orcas, especially if you do have a Goldspan Dragon out. And very often, Goldspan Dragon into Orcas that like -2/-2 or -3/-3, all their guys, is probably gonna win you the game. I also want to briefly talk about Coma for a second, because this is probably the best thing that you can do for 1,000,000 mana in this format right now. It is the ramp payoff for the Simic or Blue-Green X decks in the format right now, but you don't see a whole lot of those. However, when you do see them, Coma is the payoff for those decks outside of another card that we'll talk about a little bit later, but Coma is much better in the upcoming format. The fact that he can't be countered does matter against the Dimir control decks that are establishing a bit of a foothold in the format right now, but aside from that, this can't be killed by a Vanishing Verse, one of the few things that can exile it in the format right now. There's not a whole lot of exile sweepers outside of Shadow's Verdict, which conveniently can't hit this, but, you know, even a thing like Doomscar that would traditionally be a good sweeper can't usually remove a Coma. So Coma, I feel like, is in a much better position than it is in actual Standard moving into the next format. Now, in case you can't tell, I'm trying to scale up these honorable mentions bit by bit according to how good I think they actually are. So next I want to talk about Planeswalkers, just kind of in general. I think the Planeswalkers are just better in this environment and possibly the next standard environment than they are in current standard right now, where I've seen a lot of decks, especially the mirror control decks I just mentioned, but there are a lot of other decks that do this, that get out a Kaya, for instance, and then protect it and do wacky stuff with it. You know, they use Eye Twitches, Professor of Symbologies, and other creatures that have enter the battlefield triggers. That way, it's like a control deck, a Blood on the Snow deck or something, that can play Kaya and a bunch of creatures, but also play the sweepers. So I think that's a cool build that I've been seeing with Kaya lately, and Kaya's been shining a lot, but so has Professor Onyx. It's a great black Planeswalker. These 6-mana Planeswalkers are looking a lot better now than they were in the current standard. It feels weird to use past tense, but I don't play current standard anymore. Not very, unless I'm testing a deck. I don't really play much current standard. But in any case, not only Kaya and Professor Onyx are looking good, but Mordenkainen is looking really good. You know, there's a play pattern where you resolve Alrund's Epiphany, you get your birds, then you untap and draw and throw down Mordenkainen. You have the birds to protect it, and that can be a good play line. I just like that we're seeing, I want to say traditional Magic, but a lot of people are going to hit me for that because Planeswalkers aren't really traditional Magic. But, you know, the kind of mid-range philosophy, stick a Planeswalker, protect it until you ride it to victory. We haven't really seen much of that in the last couple of years, and it's looking like more of a reality with these really strong 5- and 6-mana Planeswalkers that we have. And finally, in terms of honorable mentions, I just want to bring up Paladin class, which could easily have made the list. Just a really good card for the mono-white aggro decks and the green-white life gain decks, which I swear are an actual thing. I see them on the ladder sometimes in 2022 Standard, and they're actually not too bad. They play Cleric class along with Paladin class. They play Ranger class some of the time, but they also play like Prosperous Innkeeper and a bunch of other life gain effects. And that deck has been reasonably effective from what I can tell in the ladder, and Paladin class is great in that too. There's also a green-white tokens deck that uses, you know, a Seek's Chariot and Battle for Bredegard. I will show you that one because probably have no idea what Battle for Bredegard does, but it's pretty good looking in these green-white tokens decks. And, you know, Paladin class is great in those because you go wide, you activate Chapter 2, and now you have a bunch of reasonably sized creatures. It's great with Clarion Spirit because it makes all the flyers 2/2s. Just Paladin class is a really, really sweet card. And again, it could have been on the list, but I'm making it my last honorable mention for a reason. It's really, really good. Let's get to the actual list here, and I will cheat a little bit on a couple of these slots because number 10 is both Kalain and Prosperous Innkeeper. Kalain is obviously very good in these Rakdos-based treasure decks. Again, sometimes they'll splash a third color, but very often, especially the farther we get into the format, the more focused the deck gets around just Rakdos and making those Rakdos card choices and not caring about, you know, splashing another color because it's really difficult to make 3 colors in this format. If you're going to do it, I think Treasure is a great way of doing it, but for the most part, the lands are difficult in this format from what we know so far. That might change if we get some cool duels in, you know, the Innistrad set, but still, you know, these treasure decks can make a third color a little easier than some other decks, but increasingly we're not seeing them do that. But Kalain is great in those Rakdos-based decks. You know, it makes that Goldspan Dragon a 5/5. That playline really matters because suddenly Goldspan can block and trade with, or in some cases block and kill, like an Imarith or something, the 5/5 blue legendary dragon. And again, that playline really matters some of the time. So Kalain has been just indispensable, but so has Prosperous Innkeeper. Sometimes the life from this matters a lot more than you think it would, especially in these, you know, go wide Selesnya decks, these tokens decks. Not only is this a bump in the mana production, but it's also, you know, it leads to sometimes 8 to 10 extra life in a game. And when you have multiple Innkeepers out, it's really nice to have like ramp and a Soul Warden, just for no reason. It's not a bad card at all. And both of these cards are not necessarily the key to, but critical cards in their respective decks. Number 9, I have to have an entry on the list for removal because I'm that kind of nerd, but I want to put a whole bunch of stuff up here like Vanishing Verse, which has been a pretty decent card lately. Power Word Kill, which actually is nowhere near as good as I want it to be. This can't kill a Goldspan Dragon or a Faceless Haven, 2 of the cards that matter the most, as we will discuss. Power Word Kill has been a little disappointing, but the 2 removal spells that I've been relying on the most so far in this format are Blizzard Brawl and Frostbite. And I'm putting them up here because they're similar in a way. They're both 1 mana. They're both snow-based. I think that these cards are major signposts to how important snow is going to be in the upcoming format because I think these are just the 2 best removal spells. in Standard. Obviously in Blizzard Brawl, with this card you have to be playing a bunch of creatures, but we've already seen a mono green Stompy deck that is dangerous. It's probably one of the top 3 decks in the 2022 environment at time of recording at the very least, and is yet to either be solved in terms of the build or solved in terms of how you build against it. So it's a really, really strong deck right now, and Blizzard Brawl is a key component of that. Just the best fight effect in the format right now. 1 mana is incredible for this, and it gives the creature indestructible, lets it attack no matter what its size is, if that's what you're worried about. Just an incredible card. But Frostbite, too, even though it's just a shock for a couple of turns, has turned out to be a very, very important card for just about any deck running red, whether it's the mono-red Goblins decks that you see from time to time, or it's these blue-red Dragons decks that rule the top levels of the format. So, again, Frostbite, both of these cards really just allow their casters to often double spell and affect tempo greatly on any given turn, very often an early turn. And that can just be a huge blowout when you Werewolf Pack Leader on turn 3 into a Blizzard Brawl and just blow your opponent out. You know, when you get that kind of tempo that early in the game, it's hard to come back from. And these cards are very good at generating that tempo. But number 8 is Luminarc Aspirant, which at the very beginning of the format, I was kind of surprised this card was still playable. I was like, wait, you don't rotate? But no, it's in Zendikar. So yeah, we get to play with Luminarc Aspirant for a while, and this is still one of the strongest white creatures in the format. Make no mistake. Even though it takes a hit, you know, it doesn't have All Seed to protect it, doesn't have the dog, Selfless Savior, to protect it. And mono white, if it lost... You know, if there's one card that mono white loses that greatly affects the playability of that deck, it's Selfless Savior. But Luminarc Aspirant's still a good creature, even though you're kind of sending it out there naked. No protection, you know, no dog to jump in front of it, no, you know, All Seed to jump in front of it. And that can kind of suck, but if the card sticks for a turn or two, it still does all of the work in the world. It either makes itself bigger, or it makes the Usher of the Fallen bigger, the Elite Spellbinder bigger to swing over for more damage. Just a really, really solid card that if it's allowed to snowball is actually one of the most dangerous cards. You know, one of the most dangerous snowballs in all of Standard. But for number 7, I'm just going to put the better Luminarc Casper in its Ranger class, and honestly, this card could be even farther up the list. I'll say that from this entry forward, except for maybe numbers 2 and 1. So, like, you know, from 7 to 3, I think that these cards are all more or less interchangeable on the list. I think that they're all very, very good in much the same way. And Ranger class is, so far at least, a dominant card in 2022 Standard. And it looks, you know, all signs point to that's going to hold into the actual Standard environment after rotation. Just look at all the stuff this does for you, right? I mean, it gives you a 2/2 just for playing it, which is one of the sneakily the best parts of the card, especially considering it gives you a token that can be copied by a Seeker's Chariot. That's not bad. There's a lot of cool things about just the fact this gives you a 2/2 token. But on the next turn, if you have nothing better to do to fill your curve, you can go ahead and get level 2 on it. And then it kind of gave you a 3/3. You know, and that's good, but just having Luminarc Aspirant for the rest of the game after you get to level 2 is great, especially considering this doesn't have the same problems I was just mentioning with Aspirant. You know, an Aspirant can be taken out by pretty much any removal spell people are playing right now, whereas this can't be taken out by almost any removal spell people are playing right now outside of Vanishing Verse and a couple of other main deck things. Maybe they learn for a Containment Breach, but that was kind of slow and took a lot of mana if they do something like that. So you still kind of feel up in that exchange. Just if this gets a few turns on the board to rock and roll, it's really good at giving you a superior board state, and it's really difficult to remove. And I haven't even talked about the third chapter yet, the third level, which just gives you basically 5 mana Vivian's passive ability. That's really good. Playing creatures off the top of your library is unbelievable, and you'll almost never do it on the turn that you actually get to level 3. But if you just have this sit on the board for the rest of the game and you untap with that ability, then sometimes that can lead to some ridiculous turns where you just like play 3-4 creatures in the same turn, even though you only started the turn with 1 card in your hand. Just an unbelievable card in a lot of ways. Let me put it that way. You know, in the late game, it's effective card advantage. In the mid game, it gives you, you know, the superior creatures, which is really important. Fighting it out in the trenches is something that matters a lot, from what I can tell, in the mid game turns in this format. And then on turn 1, just gives you a creature, which is good. You want that. So just an unbelievable card. But my number 6 is Alrund's Epiphany. Now, this goes in a couple of decks. It's not just in Blue-Red Dragons, but obviously. Your opponent resolves gold spend on one turn. Next turn, they untap with their gold spend on the table. They can attack you, cast Alrund's Epiphany, and attack you again with birds and the dragon. It just usually ends the game. It's really hard to deal with that play pattern, and it's one of the more important play patterns in Standard at the moment. In Standard at large, 2022 Standard, upcoming Standard, this is probably still going to be an important play pattern. But Aran's Epiphany also goes in these Dimir control decks. And you wouldn't think that something that makes you tap 6 or even 7 mana on your turn would go in these decks. But so far, it's been a 3 or 4 of in all the successful Dimir control builds that we've seen in the format to this point. That's, again, largely because of some of the play patterns I was talking about earlier where, you get your birds, you cast your own Epiphany, you get your birds, you untap, throw down your Mordenkainen, your Professor Onyx, and you have birds to protect it, or maybe you even have a couple of mana to protect it, depending on how much you had to begin with. And that is much, much stronger than it has been lately. The card also shows up in blue-green ramp decks. This is the other good ramp payoff. I said Coma was one of them earlier. This is better than Coma in most cases, especially if you can do this and then resolve Coma the next turn after you untap. That seems good. Or if you already have a Coma on the battlefield, then you're effectively getting like extra Serpents for kind of nothing. So Aran's Epiphany is great in the Simic ramp deck, and you play 4 of it there too. There's just a lot of places this card goes because free turns are good. Free turns are always going to be powerful, almost no matter what they're costed at. So this card was bound to be on the list. But number 5 is a card that can take it away, and that is Elite Spellbinder. Now, sometimes your opponent will foretell the Aran's Epiphany on turn 2. You can't nab it with a Spellbinder, but still, sometimes they won't do that. You grab it. But there's all kinds of other stuff this can grab. The Sweeper, from Doomscar to Shadow's Verdict, and anything else that might shut down your small ball aggro deck. But, there's Boros decks that like this card. Obviously, Mono White likes the card. There's a Blue-White Tempo deck that's kind of going around. Don't tell anybody. That really likes this card. There's a Black-White deck or 2 or 3 that really likes this card. Elite Spellbinder is just an insane thing to exist. Right? The thing that takes the answer or the play that invalidates your plays out of your opponent's hand for a few turns, gets you the tempo you need, all on a 3-power flyer, which is good if you have a Luminar Casper, a Ranger class, or really any way to protect this or make it bigger. It can just end games by itself while also pushing your opponent back a couple of turns. It's good in the current Standard, and it's good in the next Standard, I can more or less assure you. Now, for numbers 4 and 3, both these cards go in the same deck, but I wasn't really sure how to order them. But I've gone ahead and said that number 4 is Werewolf Pack Leader, because the only deck this is really in is mono green. Now, you'll see it in the green-white decks every now and again, or the green-black aggro decks, which sort of are a thing, but not really. People are trying, is all I'm saying. But often I think that's a mistake. Unless your deck is very heavily green and you're only splashing the black or the blue for like Decisive Denial or something, then I really don't think that you should put this card in 2-color decks. Because you need, what is it, like 20 green sources to reliably cast this on turn 2? It's a very high number of green sources. So again, I would only play a second color if I was splashing very minimally. So I'm not sure it goes in those, but it definitely goes in all the mono green aggro decks and is very likely the best actual creature in those decks. I mean, not only is the card overstated for its mana cost, we can all agree on that, but it's also a mana sink that provides card advantage. And I was going to say, like, any Stompy deck throughout history would want that, but a lot of decks throughout history would just want that. Like, I'll take that in my control deck, right? Oh, it's a thing that draws cards and invalidates all of my opponent's 2 and 3 drops. It's probably better than a removal spell half the time. So, like, it's just a solid card on just about every level, and it's no surprise that it's in the top 5 of this list. I think we all saw that coming, but in terms of cards that are in mono green and help make that deck the force that it is in the format right now, I think the better card overall is probably Asika's Chariot, so it's going to make the top 3. Now, in mono green specifically, I think Werewolf Pack Leader probably does the job better in that deck than Asika's Chariot does. But Asika's Chariot does a lot of work in that deck specifically. One of the reasons that it actually cracks the top 3 over Pack Leader, though, is because it can be played in more decks. This is also in the green-white tokens deck. It's in the green-blue vehicles deck. Again, don't tell anybody I told you that was a deck, but yeah, it's a good one. You play Cosima and Asika's Chariot and a bunch of other stuff. It's a good deck. But anyway, it's just a really fine card that can be splashed into a lot of different decks and is doing a lot of work outside of just mono green, but it's still one of the most important cards in mono green. This is one of the reasons why I think Control isn't as good as it once was. This is just a really strong vehicle to have access to, and there are a lot of reasons why I think Control isn't as good as it once was. And a lot of that is cards that Control has access to. But in this case, it's because of a card that is so good against Control. All right, so not only that, But the ability to, increase your board presence even if it attacks is amazing. A Faceless Haven can turn on and then power this up if your opponent has like a 3-power blocker. So you don't want to attack with your Haven, but you do want to attack with your Chariot. If you have, 1 cat token left out, but you don't have 2, you power it up with your Haven, create another cat token, then you don't have to power up your Haven anymore if you don't want to. Or your Haven can go attacking, and your 2 cat tokens can crew the Chariot from then on. It's just, there's a lot that this card does, and the fact that it's more or less immune to, sorcery speed removal a lot of the time is a big point in its favor. The fact that it survives sweepers is a big point in its favor. Just so far been a huge force in the format, and is kind of a point of dimension for mono green that it sorely needs. But again, even outside of mono green, Cat Card does a ton of work, so just for cuteness alone it should be on the list. But obviously this is one of the strongest cards in the format, and I don't think that's a controversial statement. But number 2 and number 1, this is where I said, remember way back there, remember the beginning of this video, good times, where I said that numbers 7 through 3 were all kind of interchangeable on the list in a lot of ways? Well, that means that numbers 2 and 1 are more or less set in stone in my opinion. So these never changed. I changed this list a whole lot while I was writing it, but 2 and 1 never changed. So number 2, however, I think numbers 2 and 1 are kind of interchangeable too for different reasons, but it's neither here nor there. Number 2 is Faceless Haven. I just mentioned this card. And there's a reason for that. It is great in mono green, as are all the creature lands. The creature lands are another reason why control just isn't working in a lot of ways. I think if control does work, then Dimir is maybe the best configuration of it that we have right now. Although I really like Doomscar as a sweeper. I really do. But blue-white doesn't have any good ways to take out Planeswalkers. It's not diverse enough. Altogether, I think blue-green or blue-black is the way to go. But that said, again, these creature lands, and Faceless Haven, I think still being the best creature land in the format. The Hydra land is good. Den of the Bugbear is good. All the creature lands are fantastic. But I still think Faceless Haven is the best. It doesn't cost too much to activate, and it's relatively big once you do activate it. And the ability to be any creature type is like way better than you think. Not only does this go in the monocolored aggro decks, but it goes in a great deal of control decks too. Just a huge variety of play across a lot of different deck types in the format right now. And I don't see anything that's going to stop Faceless Haven from being an important card moving forward for the next year. And finally, number 1, you probably guessed this one because you haven't seen it yet, but it's Goldspan Dragon. Gary Oldman here has, honestly, if you're paying attention to the format, actually come down in relevance over the last week, because the first week of 2022 Standard, this was the most important card in the format, pretty much bar none. But as we dig into this format a little bit, and as we find ways to answer Goldspan Dragon, I do feel like it's gone down in relevance over the last even just few days here, as we start to solve this format a little bit more. But it's still easily one of the most powerful things you can be doing, and just the fact that so much of the meta analysis in this format so far has been put towards solving Goldspan Dragon, that's a good sign that it's probably the most powerful card in the format. I mean, when decks are devoting, 3, 4, 6 whole slots to making sure they can deal with this card without it leaving too much behind, people are playing Soul Shatter and stuff, and I really don't think people would be playing Soul Shatter if Goldspan Dragon wasn't a card. Although Soul Shatter is really good at taking out Planeswalkers, so there's that too, but still, people are doing things I just don't think they'd be doing if they didn't have to worry about Goldies. So this card is probably not only the best card in Standard right now, but moving into the next Standard, I am pretty sure that a lot of decks that people build on day 1 are going to heavily center around this card, because it's just a proven beater, just a proven bomb in this format right now. And again, really don't see that changing. Even if we get answers to it, it's still just a brutal piece of cardboard. But that's my list. There were a bunch of other cards I didn't mention here. I probably could have made this a top 20. I mean, I already talked about a million cards during the honorable mentions, but there's a bunch of stuff I didn't mention here that I nonetheless think are very strong cards. So if I didn't say your favorite thing or a card that you think is really strong in the format, let me know down there in the comments section. We'll have a discussion, because again, easily could have been a top 20 list, which bodes well for the format. The fact that there are so many cards that I think are either strong build arounds or are just like auto includes in a lot of decks, depending on what colors you're in, is you could view it as a bad sign because there's a lot of cards that are just so strong that they must go into certain decks. But it's also a good sign there are so many of those cards, you know, that can lead to a format that has a lot of strong cards, but nothing overtly broken, you know, which after Throne of Eldraine standard for the last couple of years is more than welcome. So I'm really excited about the upcoming format, and even with some cards that are problematic and tiresome to deal with in some situations, these play patterns will get stale, especially given that we have, thanks to 2022 standard, we have an extra like 3 months to play this format. So that'll stale play patterns really, really quickly. I get that, but still, it's exciting so far to play in this format. I feel like it's still pretty open for the most part, and I can't wait to see what Innistrad adds to it. So just, again, Magic is fun again. From based on what I can tell about 2022 standard, we are grinding again, we are getting value again, we are creating small incremental edges turn by turn again, and I love that kind of Magic. So again, having the time of my life, and I hope you are too. But like I said, that's it. Back to self-promotion. Just like, subscribe, share it around. Nobody ever asked you to do that anymore. Just this once, share the video to your favorite social medias. You can also clip YouTube videos now. Did you guys know that? It's a new thing. So you can clip parts of this and then share it to your social media, and that apparently matters. I don't know if it does. I don't know. Try it if you want to. Aside from that, do this stuff again. And watch me play Magic on Twitch. I feel like I'm getting better at Magic, even though I've been playing for 26 years. I feel like I've gotten a lot better in the last 6 months. I don't know why, but I feel that way. And then you can also donate to the channel if you want to. Support us on Patreon for $1 a month, and you can vote on what stuff we do. I got a Patreon poll up around the same time this video goes up. So if you want to be part of that, it's $1 a month. $1. Come on. And it really helps out a lot. But that's all the self-promotion I'm going to do right now because, again, I can't stand it. I would rather tell you to be nice and kind to your fellow person. I was going to say your fellow man. To everybody around you in your life. Just be a good person. That's the important. You don't have to give me money. Just be a good person. But anyway, I think that's all I got for this one, and I should probably stop babbling. I am Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.